There's something about tragic stories that makes them great, especially when you already know what is going to happen even if you haven't experienced that media yet. When you sit down and watch Revenge of the Sith, you know that Anakin Skywalker is going to become Darth Vader. Or when it comes to games, playing Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, you know what's going to happen to Zack at the end even though you really don't want it to. This holiday season, we expect to experience the same with a prequel to Breath of the Wild. Going into that prequel, we know that the world is essentially going to end by the end of that game. Or is it? Advertised and marketed as the story of 100 years before Breath of the Wild, here is my review of Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity for the Nintendo Switch. When it comes to story, I'm not going to tell you guys very much because almost all of Age of Calamity's story is spoilers for Breath of the Wild. So in this video, we are going to talk about a basic synopsis, whether the game is canonical to Breath of the Wild or not, and to keep all of those spoilers saved for a video I'm going to upload on Wednesday where we do a little podcast audio thing for talking about those spoilers. The basic synopsis is that Age of Calamity starts right when Calamity Ganon hits Hyrule, and Princess Zelda accidentally awakens and sends a small egg-shaped guardian to the past. We then follow the heroes of Hyrule as they work with this egg-shaped guardian being warned about what is going to happen in the future, and them trying to stop it. That being said, despite Nintendo very heavily advertising this as the story that happened 100 years before Breath of the Wild, it is a story that happened 100 years before Breath of the Wild, but takes place in an alternate timeline, giving us a what-if scenario instead of a canonical prequel. Though that isn't to say that this is a bad game. The story told here is a legitimately good one, giving us a lot more backstory and really tense emotional moments with a lot of Breath of the Wild's characters, especially with Princess Zelda and the 4 champions. When it comes to gameplay, Age of Calamity is a Musou action game with RPG elements. That being said, it is important to point out that this is not an open world game like Breath of the Wild was. You have a menu-based world map with missions that you can go into, giving you access to altered versions of part of the Breath of the Wild map, but you never have access to all of it. In these battles, you're not going to be climbing everything and just moving to where you want to. You will be in large maps with giant hordes of enemies that you have to take down per your mission objectives. Granted, it isn't all going to be different. A lot of gameplay aspects have been made and integrated to make it feel a lot more like Breath of the Wild's combat. You can use the paraglider during aerial combat. Every character can use runes like stasis and bombs. The control scheme is much closer to Breath of the Wild than Hyrule Warriors. And when fighting boss characters, you still have the Flurry Rush counterattacks for when you do a perfect dodge. The latter of which is even enhanced by the Musou formula, with you being able to do it so many times and break a boss's guard so you can do a really flashy cinematic follow-up attack. Enemies and bosses will also often drop materials like you would find in the original Breath of the Wild that you take with you when you complete the missions and use on the world map for passive missions to get character upgrades, unlock special services, and many other things. That also leads us into customization. All of those services you can unlock with materials allow you to do a lot of things that harken back to the original Hyrule Warriors, like combining weapons together to basically level up the one you want and make it stronger, or paying rupees to level up other characters so they can catch up with your main. Though it is worth mentioning that all of the costumes that you unlock as you play through the game are only really usable by Link, other characters not getting their alternate costumes until the game's story is beaten. Now, the combination of all of these systems coming together and the variety and different feel of all of the game's characters in the roster really makes it a really fun and flashy Musou game. Though being a Musou game means that you can't get around the fact that this game will eventually feel a little repetitive. By the time the games end, you will have different types of objectives in the game, but you'll still feel like you're doing a lot of the same stuff. The fact that this game does have quite a bit of content for a Musou game definitely helps and doesn't help that at the same time. I've done around half of the game's side quests, doing pretty much all of them at the beginning of the game and slowly becoming more selective by the end of it. By the time I finished the game's story and unlocked the post-game stuff, I had been playing for around 20 to 21 hours. Doing all of the other side quests and unlocking the post-game characters for the roster will take you from that 20 to 21 easily up to about 35 to 40. Next, let's get into presentation. Visually, the game looks pretty good in docked mode. It recreates the Breath of the Wild style really well, only getting a bit of jaggy and blurriness when you go into handheld mode. The real criticism a lot of people have with the game is regarding performance. When the demo came out, it had a lot of FPS drops, and the game still does have drops, but not nearly as many. When you have it in docked mode, it tries to stay at a 30 frames per second most of the time, dipping every so often in combat, especially when you use one of your special finisher moves. Though handheld mode unfortunately still has a lot of drops pretty much all the time. The unfortunate truth is the fact that Omega Force's games have had these kinds of problems for years and years. Though it certainly doesn't help that Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, also on the Switch, runs at 60 frames per second in docked mode rather than 30. But enough about that. Let's dive into battery life. On the original model, Age of Calamity has a battery range of 2 hours and 13 minutes up to 3 hours and 3 minutes. On the Nintendo Switch Lite, it has a range of 2 hours and 42 minutes up to 3 hours and 44 minutes. And finally, on the Redboxer V2 2019 model, it has a range of 4 hours and 22 minutes up to 5 hours and 58 minutes. In conclusion, Age of Calamity is a fun Musou action game that combines Omega Force's formula with a lot of Breath of the Wild. Now on the downside, the performance is a bit iffy, especially in handheld mode, and the Musou formula can get repetitive after so much time of playing. But if you're fine with the genre and aren't too upset about this not being the 100% canon prequel we were hoping for, it is a blast to play through and experience. Reviews to Go rates Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity for the Nintendo Switch an 8.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching and have a great day.